Alors, bienvenue à tous et toutes. Je m'appelle donc Julien Pieret, je suis professeur de droit public ici à l'ULB, à la faculté de droit et de criminologie et à la faculté de philosophie et de sciences sociales. Et j'ai l'honneur, en quelque sorte, de faire partie de toute une série d'académiques, de personnalités du monde universitaire à travers le monde qui se mobilisent autour de l'affaire Julian Assange et qui, en particulier, concrètement, nous sommes régulièrement sollicités par l'équipe de défense de Julian Assange pour participer aux réflexions stratégiques, pour faire profiter cette équipe de notre expertise sur certains enjeux particuliers que soulève cette affaire, en ce qui me concerne, mais je ne m'étendrai pas là-dessus. Je travaille beaucoup sur la jurisprudence de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme en matière de liberté d'expression, qui est évidemment l'un des aspects les plus aigus de cette affaire Assange. Et si l'affaire n'était pas aussi dramatique, si elle ne soulevait pas des enjeux qui touchent au cœur même de nos prétendues démocraties et de nos prétendus états de droit, ben je serais particulièrement heureux de vous présenter aujourd'hui une personnalité remarquable, Deepa Driver. Vous allez faire sa connaissance à travers l'entretien que je vais mener avec elle. Mais je voulais avant tout remercier très très chaleureusement Marie-France Depré, qui est l'une des chevilles ouvrières du comité de libération de Julian Assange. Alors, je ne connais pas très très bien Marie-France, je l'ai rencontrée essentiellement par mail il y a quelques semaines, mais j'ai déjà pu constater que sa pugnacité n'avait d'égal que sa modestie. Donc voilà, mais je tiens vraiment à saluer l'énergie extraordinaire qu'elle consacre à cette mobilisation internationale, mais ici en particulier en Belgique. Et je remercie évidemment mesdames et messieurs les traducteurs et traductrices qui font un travail qui ne cesse de m'impressionner. Deepa Driver. Alors, je vais... Oui ? D'accord. Celui-là, c'est celui... Oui, ok, d'accord. Ça fait beaucoup de micros, mais il faut le garder près de moi, Marie-France, sinon ça n'enregistrera pas. Voilà. Deepa Driver, vous allez faire sa connaissance à travers l'entretien que nous allons mener. Donc, je poserai mes questions en français et en anglais. Deepa répondra en anglais et il y aura ces traductions chuchotées là, à ma gauche, ici à l'auditoire. Alors, Deepa Driver, elle nous vient aussi du monde académique. Elle enseigne la corporate accountability, l'éthique, la régulation financière à l'université de Reading. Mais c'est aussi une activiste qui a plusieurs casquettes. Elle est fort impliquée dans les combats syndicaux britanniques et en particulier dans les combats syndicaux propres au monde académique. Mais si nous avons aujourd'hui, ce soir, l'honneur de la recevoir à l'ULB, c'est en sa qualité d'observatrice juridique. Elle a observé pour le compte de toute une série d'associations et en particulier pour la Gauche Unie de l'Assemblée parlementaire du Conseil de l'Europe. Elle a observé les audiences de la procédure judiciaire en cours actuellement au Royaume-Uni. Je ne vous apprendrai rien en vous rappelant que Julian Assange est pour le moment détenu dans une prison londonienne dans l'attente de son extradition vers les États-Unis. Où il serait jugé pour toute une série d'infractions. On y reviendra dans le cours de cette conférence. Et bien sûr, une procédure d'extradition, il y a des recours qui sont possibles devant la justice britannique. Ces recours ont été exercés. Certains de ces recours sont toujours en partie en cours. Et c'est toutes ces audiences que Deepa Driver a observé. Et son témoignage est évidemment exceptionnel puisque c'est un témoignage de première main à partir de ses observations au sein des tribunaux britanniques. Et donc l'entretien va essentiellement porter autour de cette expérience. Alors avant qu'elle ne fasse un petit mot d'introduction qui reviendra aux origines de l'affaire Assange et finalement aux sources de la persécution qu'il subit maintenant depuis plus d'une dizaine d'années. Avant cela, elle a tenu à ce que nous projetions une courte vidéo et vous comprendrez assez rapidement les liens que présente cette vidéo avec notre thématique, notre thème du jour. Et puis après, Deepa prendra la parole pour une brève introduction. Et puis enfin, l'entretien commencera. On a prévu une petite heure d'entretien, quelques questions autour des constats qu'elle a pu poser à l'occasion de sa mission d'observatrice. Et puis, bien entendu, vous aurez la possibilité de poser des questions complémentaires, de faire quelques commentaires, quelques suggestions. Et on terminera cette soirée par faire un petit état des lieux de la mobilisation en cours à Bruxelles, en Belgique, en Europe, mais fort heureusement partout dans le monde. Voilà. Petite vidéo pour nous mettre dans l'ambiance de cette affaire Assange.
Bonjour. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. The ships that you saw made by Muath al-Alawi were displayed in an art exhibition at the John Jay College in the US. And these ships and paintings from various prisoners were given to the lawyers to hand over to the family or as an act of thanks. And on the ship's sail, as you saw in the film, you can see it's been checked by the guards at Guantanamo. But after that exhibition at John Jay College, the US government decided that the prisoners can no longer take their art when they leave Guantanamo. And for a long time, that was the rule. It's recently been changed because of intervention from the UN. But one of the reasons that regulation was introduced is that it is typical of the arbitrariness and also the inhumanity as of the regime at Guantanamo. It's also very typical of the fact that in order to convince us that these men and boys as young as 14, like Omar Khadr, who were held at Guantanamo, were not just the worst of the worst, they were not human, and they did not deserve the treatment that we as human beings deserve. In fact, you know, the things that were done to them, including sexual humiliation, the throwing of menstrual fluid on a Muslim man. A friend of mine, I'll tell you about him in a second, experienced this at Guantanamo. And I'm horrified by the kind of conversations some of these prisoners have had. They've been told that their mother is being raped in the next room, and they can hear a woman crying. Those kinds of conversations that we only know through prisoner testimony or sometimes information that gets out of the prison from a prison guard is part of what we need to understand if we do not want to have many more brutalities like Guantanamo. And I am here to talk to you about Julian Assange because when the men were originally taken to Guantanamo, and for the first few years, even the International Committee of the Red Cross had difficulty meeting the prisoners, especially those who were termed high-value detainees. So we did not know the identity of the prisoners or how they were captured, why they were captured, and what conditions they were being kept in at Guantanamo. And it was through the work of Chelsea Manning, who had the courage to blow the whistle on this systematic torture, that we understand the Guantanamo Bay, what they call the detainee assessment briefs, which were the US records of how these men were captured, what names they had. Now, some of these names are not even correct, but at least we had some sense of the identity of the 780 people held there, which makes it slightly different from black sites where sometimes you have no understanding of who is there and who is going through extreme and sadistic torture. So the reason, you know, WikiLeaks was important, and I know some of you in the room have heard or understood this many times before, was because it allowed a discussion in the public domain where, for once, it was not the government surveilling the people, it was us holding the government to account or holding big corporations to account, because, as you know, WikiLeaks made revelations not just about the war crimes, like at Guantanamo, but also about toxic waste dumping in the Ivory Coast, corruption in Kenya, so many different pieces of information that allowed us to really understand the world we live in. Because, as you know, many of us get our news from the media, mainstream, even alternative, some of us more alternative, or through the discussions we have with friends and family or experts. But what if what is happening behind closed doors, where the people who know what is really going on make it a crime to tell you what's happening? That's why we need WikiLeaks, because for the first time, whistleblowers didn't have to go and find a supportive journalist who will verify their data, then convince their editor that this is a story worth running, then convince the big media baron who owns the corporation that this is profitable to talk about this, that it won't affect his profits, and then create a persistent understanding of what's going on, not just one article or 2 inches in the paper. And it is to understand whether, you know, some of you may have a brother who is in a care home, you know, in an elderly home, and they may be being abused. How do you know? You only know if somebody who's working there tells you, because you are not there every day. You may have a child in a school who's being beaten. You may have so much evidence that the local corporation is dumping sewage into the canal, in the water that you are drinking. How do you know? You don't, because most of these crimes take place in places we cannot see, and we don't have the expertise to understand. What is also important about WikiLeaks is that they used, unlike one journalist who looks at your documentation, your data, WikiLeaks introduced a way to have large volumes of data and a range of experts to examine that data. So you could now move from Daniel Ellsberg photocopying the Pentagon papers all through the night, through to receiving gigabytes and gigabytes of information like this from America to a publisher in Europe, secure for the whistleblower to cover their identity, and secure in terms of the documentation by the time it arrives. So the technological skill to be able to do that. And also a global reach. So WikiLeaks worked with smaller organizations like Al Akbar in Lebanon, Espresso in Italy, and also big or Repubblica in Italy, and also big organizations like Le Monde, The Guardian, The New York Times, Washington Post. And this model of journalism, where you use small journalists who know the local detail, as well as big organizations that understand, that have a global audience, is special for WikiLeaks. And most important about WikiLeaks is when they released information, they had the courage to stand by it. Their courage was very important, because imagine today Le Monde gets pressure from the French government to take away from the newspaper something that is embarrassing to the French state. Do we expect that? Yes, it is possible, because politicians are always trying to put pressure to hide things which are embarrassing for them. But WikiLeaks, this small organization, not a Le Monde, not a Guardian, not a New York Times, resisted them in a way which was completely special and different. And this is why WikiLeaks was important. And when you look at the video, one of the things that Moat says in the video is that I don't like to wait. Moat has been in that prison since 2002. He was cleared for release, no charges, no trial, cleared for release by the Periodic Review Board in 2022, in early 2022. It is now September 2023. He is still at Guantanamo. And the PRB, or the Prisoner Review Board, says, or the process, they have admitted that the US do not know whether he engaged directly in combat. They do not even know that. So there is no clear accusation of a crime. And as we know, accusation is not enough. We need a legal process. So I guess my starting point is, why should we care? Why should there be a discussion with lots of people? People who have influence in order to be able to secure the release of Julian. And the answer is, we should have that discussion because we care about Moat. We care about my friend Mohamedou Ould-Slahi, who spent 15 years at Guantanamo without charge, without trial, and another 5 years in house arrest, because he had a conversation with a friend who was coming to visit him, where he asked, they were going to have tea together in the night, and he had run out of sugar. So they were having a conversation about tea and sugar. And it was assumed that this was a conversation about explosives. Under extreme and brutal torture, Mohamedou said, yes, sugar is the code word for explosives. And so Mohamedou, a very gentle, very simple, very deeply, profoundly intelligent man, spent 15 years of his life. And when he has left Guantanamo, he is still not free, because he still carries the pain and the suffering and the sorrow and the physical harm of being tortured. And it is for him and for others, including Hanan Saleh Matroud, an 8-year-old child who was killed by the King's Company B Regiment on the streets of Baghdad by a soldier shooting a bullet into her stomach, presumably in error, whose family was offered a few £100 as compensation. It is for her, it is for Moat, it is for Mohamedou that we are here today. And I hope that in discussion with Julian, I will be able to answer some of your questions and tell you a little bit about what it is like in the court in the UK, because I see my job as being your eyes and ears and reporting to you, the public, what is really going on behind those closed doors. Because, and I will tell you a little bit more about this when we speak, it's difficult to get in that court. So.
Thank you, Deepa. Thanks again for being here, not only here tonight at the ULB, but also these last days in Brussels, meeting MP, having some meetings with people involved in the Julian affair struggle for freedom. Et donc, Deepa a passé ici quelques jours à Bruxelles pour mobiliser toute une série de personnes autour de l'affaire Julian Assange. Je suggère qu'on aille directement au cœur de votre mission d'observatrice juridique. So I suggest to go directly to the core of your legal observer's mission. And maybe my first question would be, it's quite a naive question, but why was this trial the subject of such an observation mission? What were your fears, and did they come true? And what were the main findings of your mission? What conclusion did you draw regarding the fairness of these proceedings? For example, has Julian Assange been able to participate properly in these hearings, despite his detention in Belmarsh prison? So, peut-être la première question, ce serait, mais finalement, pourquoi fallait-il observer ces procédures liées à l'extradition programmée de Julian Assange vers les États-Unis? Quelles étaient les craintes qui justifiaient cette mission? Et finalement, est-ce que ces craintes se sont avérées réalisées? Et parmi les nombreuses questions qui peuvent venir en tête, c'est la question tout simplement de la participation de Julian Assange à son procès. Et finalement, est-ce qu'on peut considérer que ce procès a été équitable?
Thanks. My role has been as the legal observer for the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers in the UK. That society is almost 100 years old, and usually our legal observation missions are to places like Turkey or to maybe countries, I won't single out Turkey, but other countries where there is a concern that the judicial process may or may not be fair to certain types of individuals. And the idea behind any trial observation, any legal observation, is not to intervene to the court or the judge, because that will be done by the prosecution and the defense lawyers, but to create a sense that for the judge that this proceeding is being watched, that people are paying interest, and when they are interested in this case, that they expect fairness and due process. So I won't go into the details of how a legal observation is run, but I'm happy to take questions later. But my mission has been, on behalf of Haldane and also on behalf of the European Lawyers for Democracy and World Human Rights, ELDH, and more recently, for the last just over a year, for the Unified European Left, GUI and NGL, in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. In all these organizations can see that this is a case of international importance, and there is likely to be an element of political pressure to arrive at a certain outcome. And it is, I guess, because it's always difficult to say this before you go into a mission because you don't know what is going to happen. It is a question of judgment. And I went to the court the first time when Julian was brought to the court for his administrative hearings. So there are two types of extradition hearings. One is you decide, oh, you get 2 hours, you get 5 hours to do this, you are allowed to call 20 witnesses, you are allowed to, that kind of administrative hearings. You are allowed to introduce this type of evidence, not this type of evidence, that kind of general stuff. And then you have the actual extradition hearings where you have the witnesses and the lawyers making the case, and then the judge makes a decision. So when I went to the first few administrative hearings, it was after finding out that when Julian was arrested, you remember that picture of him coming out of the embassy with his beard and his hair looking quite wild. The reason he looked so wild was because he was denied access to a razor or a haircut to make him, to continue the stereotyping of him as somebody who should be deprived of his humanity, who can be smeared for 9 years without any charges, because there were never any charges, for example, in Sweden, who can be called an enemy of the state, and who can be treated in a way in which ordinary people are not treated. For example, Julian, most people, even in a prison, get 1 hour in the sunlight. But Julian, when he was in the embassy, was in a space 15 by 10, in the best case, and no outside space, no outside time. When he had a very serious tooth infection, the British government denied him access to go to the hospital. So for several years, he had an infected tooth. And you know how it is, 2 days, 3 days, a bad tooth, you're in pain. But for years, he did not receive treatment. Similar with a shoulder injury. And then, in all of this, you then come to the court where this man is brought to the court and the judge, you know, this man says his name, his date of birth, and the judge says, when he's sentencing him, that he's a narcissist, without hearing anything. Send him for a bail violation, which is a minor offense, to give him a long sentence, almost 11 months, just under a year, in Belmarsh, in a maximum security prison where we put convicted rapists, pedophiles, people who also deserve humane treatment, but who are serious violent criminals. And when we put a publisher in that prison, you think something's not right. And so I went to the court, and I was sitting in the courtroom in the first administrative hearing, and I was very surprised that to go into the court, it was incredibly hard. We were treated like criminals outside the court for wanting to go in. And when we went in, and this happened at a number of extradition administrative hearings, all of a sudden, 10 minutes before the hearing, because you queue outside, then you queue inside, then you queue at the door, all of a sudden we were told, oh, today we only allow 3. Today we only allow 10. Today we are not in the big room, we are in the small room, so no journalists. So this suggests already to me there is a situation where somebody may be trying to hide something. And to me it was very important that this is documented, and we say, we do not agree to this. We say we we will continue to watch what you are doing. And so with the help of colleagues who would let me know if, because sometimes you got 24 hours notice or less to get into the hearing, you don't know if you get permission. Usually you're a legal observer, you write to the court, you say, here are my credentials, please may I attend? In this case, nobody replies. You send it 2 weeks in advance, if you know, no reply. Or you get a reply at the last moment and it says, we may allow you on the online link. No, I want to be in the court. Or they, you know, this kind of behavior continued throughout. And there were some unusual things said in court, including by the judge that the government wanted her to progress the case quickly at one stage. Now we expect the separation between the state and the judiciary. So this itself again rings alarm bells. You have a non-violent prisoner who is not allowed to sit with his lawyers. Usually, you know, when somebody is a disabled prisoner, Julian has a number of health conditions, long-term health conditions, including depression. Who would not be depressed if they are kept for 6.5 years without sunlight? And he has also, he has had childhood history of various medical conditions. I don't want to go into them. But this is a prisoner who doesn't have a violent track record, so you are not worried that he will stab his lawyer or hit somebody and run away. So there is no reason to deny him access to sit next to his lawyer in the court. So when these basic things start to happen, then you go, and so these administrative hearings completed, and then we waited for a date for the actual hearings. And while we were waiting, you know, the United States served while Julian was in prison. Remember, while he was in prison, he was in very difficult conditions. It was COVID. And the excuse of COVID was used to deny prisoners basic association rights. So they couldn't see each other. Many were in their cells 22, 23 hours a day. They did not meet when they were eating food. And Julian's situation, even 3 months after he was in the prison, they had denied him his reading glasses, which had somehow gone missing. So Julian could not read. And as an intellectual, it was quite a difficult time. He also experienced a lot of physical discomfort because prison food is not very appetizing. In the UK, there are a lot of cuts to the prison's budget. So at one stage, Julian had lost a lot of weight. And there were times when the heating, the chauffage in the prison was not working, and the temperature was 0 degrees. So for these circumstances, prisoners' families had given clothes. But during COVID, Julian's warm clothes were not given to him for several months because they said that they needed a paper to sign to bring the clothes from the bâtiment to the prison. And that paper could not be given because of COVID. So here was a man cold putting books against his window so that he is not so cold at night. And so you have this prisoner having difficult circumstances, and of course you can understand the court wanting to move the case quickly. But then you realize that he cannot prepare for the trial because there are thousands and thousands of pages of documentation. And he is facing 175 years in a supermax prison. I will come to what a supermax prison is in a second. And they gave him, after a few months, a computer. But the computer had the keys glued down. So it was impossible for him to prepare for the trial. He could not have, for almost 9 months, he had no contact with his family. And he couldn't see his lawyers. So this is a very, very unusual case. So when the lawyers say we need a bit more time to respond to the things because we need to talk to our client, and the judge says, no, we have to progress the case quickly, and she pretends as though this is because he has been in prison a long time, then you begin to think, something is going on. Then we went to the Old Bailey. Now, you have never been to the Old Bailey, many of you. I had never actually seen it from this angle. Now, I am somewhat bourgeoisie, okay? So when I go to a court, or when I go to a meeting, okay, I'm black and I'm short and I'm a woman, so I'm not treated like a tall white man, but usually I'm treated with respect. But when I went to the Old Bailey, when I was queuing outside, because on the first day, 40 non-NGOs, foundations, including Amnesty, Reporters Without Borders, were told, you were granted access, but now we revoke it. The judge has decided that in the interests of justice, you cannot come into the courtroom. So the observers are all removed from the courtroom. And I realized that there are, out of 96 seats in the two courts, which were courtrooms like this, but with a, typical English courtroom, only 2 seats were available to the public. 5 in total during the day, but 2 first thing in the morning. So, because I wanted to get in and I thought, I'm not going anywhere, I queued, sometimes at 4 a.m., sometimes at 3 a.m. The Old Bailey is a beautiful building, but the public gallery is the entrance to the public gallery is in a little tunnel, which looks a little bit scary in the dark. So we had some supporters, like some of you here, who joined me in the morning to make sure I had a space, because also in the queue were people, and I cannot prove this, so this is not my observation formally. There were some people who were trying to enter the court to block the place. So it was you needed to be there early to get a place. And it was not at the start of the trial as much, but towards the end of the hearings, we regularly had the police try to come and intimidate us and tell us to leave using COVID regulation, saying, you're not allowed to be here. I have a paper. I am from... No. Has the judge said you can attend? This is a public gallery. There is no need for the judge to say you can attend. And when you go inside the courtroom is on the 4th floor, 4th or 5th floor, right at the top. And when you go in, they check you. Okay, you don't want somebody to bring a knife and stab his gang member or whatever, okay? But when they check you, they take away your water. They take away anything that you have, even chewing gum. Right? I had one piece of chewing gum that had fallen into my bag from my children, and they took that away. No. And he told me a very interesting thing. He said, "You have a pen and paper." I said, "Yes, I'm a legal observer. You can take the pen and paper, but you cannot write." Of course, I didn't listen, but so we went up. You go into this room. It's like this room, but you are only two. And it's cold, so cold. The air conditioning is on maximum. And you're not in the same court as Julian Assange. Julian Assange is in the next room. And what you can see, you know that laptop there, or maybe that screen there, a screen of that size on a wall there. So I am doing a legal observation for several hours without water to even drink, and watching it on a screen so far away. And sometimes, very helpfully, there is no volume on the screen. And you cannot stand up, but there is no court in session. The court is next door. No, you cannot stand up. Because they will come and tell you have to sit down. It was like some dystopian third world tin pot dictatorship, pretending to be a democracy. One morning I had 9 big burly soldiers telling me I would be arrested. Me and Rebecca Vincent at Reporters Without Borders were both there that morning, and we were both threatened with arrest for being there in breach of COVID regulation. So in the court, the kinds of things I saw, so this was the atmosphere, and then the kinds of things I heard were astonishing. Julian, for receiving, obtaining, and publishing classified information, something that national security journalists do regularly. He was not, a lot of people say Julian is a whistleblower. No, he's not a whistleblower. He is a journalist. And he was doing what all good journalists do, which is to find a source and verify that the information they are giving is accurate and in the public interest, that the public should know, and publishing it. And he was taking action outside the United States, in Europe, publishing information about US war crimes. He's an Australian and Ecuadorian citizen, not an American citizen. It would be like Putin or some other dictator somewhere else or a leader somewhere else saying, if a Belgian journalist sitting in France publishes information about my war crimes, I will have an extradition arrangement with France, which I will use to take you to my country to torture you. And I will call your journalism espionage, because Julian is being prosecuted under, so it's not just the application of US law in another country, it's the application of the US Espionage Act, which is very, very controversial even in the US against a publisher. It is also very interesting that politically motivated extraditions are not permitted under UK law, even under the treaty that the US and UK have for quick extradition. And despite this, the case continues. Then we see another fact. Julian's lawyers, Julian's doctors have been spied upon. We have the evidence on YouTube. Not once, not twice, consistently, by the very country that is trying to extradite him. And yes, the case continues. We then find out from Iceland that the FBI's key witness against, or the DOJ's key witness against Julian is a convicted serial pedophile and fraudster, Sigurdur Ingi Thordarson, who has admitted that he lied. admitted in public that he lied. He fabricated evidence on the back of what I can politely only call a bribe by the United States. So, and if all of this happens and the case continues, and then we find, oh, the judge, the magistrate court judge, the most senior magistrate in that area who has also opined on Julian's case, her husband has very close links with the intelligence agencies. He's a former defense minister. Her son has shares in a company called Darktrace, which organizes against companies like WikiLeaks. She herself has received hospitality from people seeking to extradite Julian. And yet the case continues. So we now know that this is not about rule of law. This is about pretending that there is law, having this beautiful building with the Queen and the beautiful room and the high ceilings. And actually, it is a monstrosity. So I'll stop there, and I'm sorry I've taken so long.
Okay, you've already answered to the 1, 2, 3 next question. So thank you very much, Deepa. Have you drawn up a report of the results of your mission, of what you just told us? And if so, to whom was it addressed? How was your report received? But could this kind of report be used, for example, in an application to the Human Court of Human Rights, or to make again some appeal to the final decision? Donc, est-ce que ce que vous venez de nous dire a fait l'objet d'un rapport écrit qui pourrait éventuellement permettre un nouveau recours contre la procédure en Angleterre et, le cas échéant, permettre un recours devant une juridiction internationale comme la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme? Est-ce que ça pourrait être a piece of evidence, une preuve de l'inéquité du procès subi par Julian Assange? Mais avant cela, peut-être nous confirmer que les procédures qui ont été menées au Royaume-Uni sont terminées. Donc on attend la décision, parce qu'il y a encore des audiences qui sont programmées. Donc, where the UK proceedings stand at present, are they still pending or are they still over? And what would be the judicial use of a report from you on the results of your mission?
I don't know about the judicial use, because I think there are enough other things that make this case completely unbelievable. What I document is, the indignities that Julian and his family suffer, the lack of process, but there are bigger problems. If you have the lawyer's conversations with Julian being recorded by the other side, where is the question of a fair trial? There is no question. In terms of the process, the UK process is not yet complete. It's quite different from the European process. One of the main things that the US has managed to do is, by misusing extradition law, they have denied Julian a trial by the jury. The expectation is Julian is guilty, and he will be taken to the US, where he will be tried. So there is no real trial in the UK. There is only a requirement to show that he meets certain conditions to prevent extradition. And he has met those conditions because, despite all the problems I said, the lower court judge decided not to extradite. But the US provided diplomatic assurances, and these are not, they have dishonored these many times, that it will not put Julian in a particular prison and that he will receive psychological care and medical care, and that it will not keep him under SAMs. But these things called SAMs are special administrative measures. You think, oh, well, okay. No, it's conditions of extreme isolation where you are kept in a concrete cell, 8 by 6. You do not go out of your cell. When most of the time, most prisoners get an hour of exercise in the next cell sometimes. People go completely, get completely disturbed, and they try to talk to each other through the drains. Even their conversations with their lawyers are monitored. Not only that, they are not allowed to see all the evidence against them depending on the levels of classification. So just because you're not doing SAMs and you're doing something else doesn't mean that he will not be kept in conditions of very bad conditions in the US. But coming back to your question, what use is it in the courts, and what am I am currently in the process of, I have done my reports to the various groups. I come every quarter to the Parliament to talk about what's going on and to talk to the MPs. And thanks to Marie-France, I met some of the Belgian MPs here, and I hope they will talk to their colleagues. But I don't really think that's enough. I think a report needs to be written formally, and to condense 5 years. It takes time, and I'm currently working on setting aside the time to write it up, because right now I use most of my leave to go to the court. So I need some time to focus and document it in a way which is useful to others, because we are in the middle of history, and it needs to be treated with respect.
Merci Deepa. Encore l'une ou l'autre question avant de céder la parole aux membres du public. What is your analysis of the current state of forces? Are there any major political figures in the UK, in the US, or here, or anywhere else, who have committed themselves to Julian Assange cause? I've got the impression that the importance of the case and the relentlessness of the US, or the harassment of the US, constitute a kind of a break for public support as a kind of chilling effect. And for example, maybe I'm wrong, and I would be happy if I am, I think that the journalists aren't so mobilized against this case. For example, in the Belgian, French press, I read every day, I didn't see a lot of articles about Julian Assange. Is it the same in UK? And so, what is your analysis of the political forces around this case? Donc, j'interroge Deepa sur son analyse du rapport de force actuellement autour de l'affaire Assange, en craignant que l'acharnement des États-Unis soit un frein pour des mobilisations plus importantes, et notamment des mobilisations de personnalités politiques. Et en particulier, j'interroge Deepa, ou je m'interroge aussi sur le peu d'écho que l'affaire Assange reçoit actuellement aujourd'hui dans la presse. Je ne parle pas de la presse militante, mais je parle de la presse grand public, quotidienne, de toute une série de journaux qui ont collaboré avec Wikileaks. On ne les entend pas énormément. D'après vous, pourquoi?
So the major trade unions and journalists' unions globally support Assange. MEAA in Australia, the NUJ in the UK, and the International Federation of Journalists here. We have had them on many demonstrations, Reporters Without Borders. So the press freedom organizations and the journalists' union have finally woken up, some earlier than others, but some later. you're right. To some extent, it is only when there is something new or different, or maybe, you know, is Assange having a new child, then people want to cover the case. But what has changed, and this is because of the work of the activists and the constant questions you are asking, is that some of the big newspapers, Le Monde, Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post, have all taken an editorial position defending the decision not to extradite Assange and to ask Joe Biden to drop the charges. Not only that, Stella, Julian's wife, has done an amazing job, along with people like Kristen Hrafnsson and others, to mobilize media support and have good media coverage, including with, you know, people with very high following on YouTube, on Twitter. So I think that has changed. The media landscape has changed. There is still a section of the media that doesn't care. But today, in the media that we control, through our tweets, through our postings in Instagram, through Facebook, through, even though these are all, you know, big tech, we are talking about Julian, and we are talking about his case. But we shouldn't be talking about Julian. We should be talking about the war crimes in Iraq, in Afghanistan, about how the German government came under pressure from the US government when one of their citizens was abducted, rendited, and tortured, and then sent back to his country because it was a case of mistaken identity. The US put pressure on Germany to hide their role, in effect, to not prosecute those who tortured Khaled al-Masri. And it is really important that we talk about that. And that's what we should be talking about when we talk about Julian. Because that's, when they silence Julian, they cover up their war crimes. And we need to talk about their war crimes. Because there should not be 39 men still at Guantanamo.
Oops. Okay. Thank you, Deepa. Est-ce que vous êtes déjà en contact avec des associations états-uniennes qui pourraient, le cas échéant, si le pire devait arriver, quelque part continuer le travail de vigilance et d'observation du procès qu'il devrait subir aux USA? Have you already prepared the eventuality he will be extradited and judged in the US? Have you some contacts with NGO, legal observers, US legal observers? I think, but it's a question. Do you trust the US to give Julian Assange a fair trial, a trial as fair as the one he had in UK? And maybe you could remind us what might his condition of detention in the US, what kind of, what he's actually facing in the US, in fact. Qu'est-ce qu'il risque aux USA, et est-ce que vous êtes déjà en train de préparer le pire, autrement dit, son extradition, son jugement aux États-Unis, et est-ce qu'une mission comparable à la vôtre pourrait se dérouler aux États-Unis?
Maybe I'm not as cynical as I think I am, because I think that we still have to fight in Britain, where the process is not yet over. We still have to, I think fight is the wrong word actually, pressurize that the rule of law be upheld. We have to fight for justice. In that sense, we also have to believe that the United Kingdom will respect its responsibilities under the European Convention of Human Rights. So we have the court in Strasbourg, and that's where you, in Europe, have an important role to play in making sure that your MPs and your parliamentarians and those who work in the court, because the battle in the court is not won inside the courtroom alone. Half of it is outside. And this is not by me, this is not my statement, this is the statement of Gareth Pierce, Julian's lawyer. She is this fantastic woman who defended men wrongfully accused in the UK, Irish men, brutalized and tortured, and she managed to get them out. Of course, they suffered. She is known as Britain's most well-respected human rights lawyer. So Julian has a very good lawyer in the US, very good lawyer in the UK, very good lawyer in Europe with Balthazar Garçon, Christophe Marchand, Aitor Martinez, Gareth Pierce in this role. And I think we should make sure that he does not go to the US, because in the US, they have already said that as a non-US citizen, he will be denied First Amendment rights. So not only will he be denied that, the US system, we heard in the Old Bailey from the witnesses, is a system focused on something called a plea bargain. That means you agree a deal, you say, okay, you are saying 175 years, I will plead guilty and take 20 years, 10 years. And there is a lot of pressure for people who are not guilty to say they are guilty, to limit what sentence they get. So it is not in Julian's interest to go to a place, to a country that has, they released Chelsea Manning after 7 years or something like that. But when they captured her, they kept her on a tarmac in an animal cage in Kuwait. She was kept for a very long time in conditions which were described by the then UN Human Rights Rapporteur as torture, because she was denied her clothes. The light was on in her cell all the time. She was allowed to exercise at 3 in the morning. And the UK and US and Sweden are all doing similar things where they are denying international law. The UK has twice denied the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention's findings that Julian was arbitrarily detained in the embassy. They have pretended that this fantastic, well-respected group, they are not experts. Similarly, the UN Human Rights, the rapporteur on torture, he does his findings, nothing changes. If we think we are sovereign nations in Europe, and we are not just some small colonial outpost of America, then we have to make sure that the European Court of Human Rights has its standing. I hope, Britain went into Brexit to take back control. What control does it show when the US is dictating how a non-US citizen should be kept in the UK? What control?
Thank you. Last question. About your next days, maybe next weeks or next months. So what are the next steps of your struggle, of your fight in favor of Julian Assange? I'm not speaking about legal mobilization here. I'm speaking about more grassroots mobilization as, public demonstration or support events. So what are the next steps of your fight, of your struggles, and how can we, at our level, at our citizen level, be involved in this struggle? Donc voilà, quelles sont les prochaines étapes de votre engagement en faveur de Julian Assange? qu'est-ce que vous allez faire ces prochains jours, ces prochaines semaines, pas seulement sur le plan judiciaire ou juridique, mais sur le plan plus politique, et comment est-ce que nous, à notre petit niveau de citoyens, de citoyennes, on peut s'engager dans cette lutte?
I'm actually not the activist. You know, I'm a union activist and I do things, but in this case, I am not the activist. The activists are sitting here. And I think we should hear from you what you are going to do. And most importantly, I think each of us should take responsibility. Not leave it to the activists, to take responsibility in our place of control. For you, the law, and your legal friends and your, you know, that community, your academic colleagues, for you, your journalism circles. Each of us, whether it is even to 5 people, we put a sticker in the window, we go to one demonstration, that is better than 0, whatever you can do. You can put a sticker on your car, that's great. You can host a showing of Ithaca or hacking justice in your church, do that. You have a friend who is a parliamentarian, talk to him or her. You have a contact with a journalist, or you know that there is a radio show that you like, call them when they are playing the music, when they say call in. I dedicate a song to Julian Assange. So many people hear it. Do something simple, do what you can. Do it in places where lots of people will see it. The more people that know, and the more that politicians know, that public opinion, especially in the run-up to the European elections, is in favor of freeing Assange, the more likely that something will happen. But I will leave Marie-France to tell you about the actions in Belgium. Maybe later Marie-France at the end is going to come and talk to us, so I'll leave it to her.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you very much. I think we can applaud you.
Thank you.
Voilà, la parole est aux membres du public. Si vous souhaitez en savoir plus sur les constats posés par Deepa Driver durant sa mission d'observation, ou si vous voulez avoir d'autres informations sur les activités du comité ici en Belgique, mais de façon plus générale, si vous voulez des éclaircissements, des commentaires, partagez vos réflexions sur cette affaire. La parole est à vous.
Est-ce que nous pourrions avoir un état des lieux de l'attitude de la presse, en particulier ou en général? Est-ce qu'il y a une évolution, et comment les partis au pouvoir abordent la question? Donc, qu'est-ce que la presse en dit, et quelle est l'évolution de la presse, éventuellement aux États-Unis aussi?
So what is the current state of play when we're talking about the media and the press? Has there been any changes, any evolution? And what do the governing parties have to say about this? Do they talk about it in the press at all?
Voilà, une question complémentaire sur la mobilisation des journalistes. Et alors peut-être aussi, je pense que vous avez rencontré des parlementaires belges. You met some
Yes.
Belgian MPs, so I think it would be interesting to know what kind of reaction you received when you met them and explained them what you've just explained to us.
So I had a very interesting discussion with about 20 parliamentarians from across Europe last weekend. And my experience is that there is broad support for Julian across, especially in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, across political persuasions. So we have liberals, we have some Tories, we have even, of course, radical left, socialist, all of them. There are some who understand the case. This case has been going on for 10 years. And for many people, especially people in positions of power, they are reluctant to comment because they think, oh, it's complex. Oh, what if I say something wrong? And actually, Marie-France said it very nicely the other day in the Parliament. She said, this case is not complex. The fundamental issues are very simple. And we have to keep pushing to encourage them to think about those fundamental issues. And if the meeting I had with those 20-odd parliamentarians is anything to go by, there are some very good people, including, for example, in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn, in Germany, André Juncker, Zevim Dagden, and I won't mention individuals, but you know, here in Brussels, Claire Daly, Mick Wallace, lots of other people, and I know Sabrina Pignedoli was involved in the Zakharov Prize nomination. There are a lot of people across different political views who support Julian, and we should encourage them. But your question was also about the press, but I think the press, the reason WikiLeaks was important and special was because the press was failing. But we cannot allow them to use their failure as a reason to become worse. So it is up to us to ask, to write a little letter to the editor, asking, what is the state? You can ask a simple question. What is the state of the case of Julian Assange? Can you give us a summary? When they write a smear or misrepresentation, you can send in a correction. And the more we do this, the more the public narrative changes.
Yeah, but if I go on this discussion, you mentioned only members of parliamentary assembly.
Yeah.
And we know in our so-called democracy, parliamentary assembly haven't so much power. So have you also met, had you the opportunity to meet some ministries? And for example, some Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Are there, okay, beyond the parliamentary assembly, some governments taking position in favor of Julian Assange? And I would like to ask you the situation in Australia, the country where Julian is from. So I was told that there was a kind of delegation, an Australian delegation in the US last week or last 2 weeks. Did you have news? Have you some news about that? Donc, je me permettais de souligner que Deepa nous parlait de rencontres avec des parlementaires et que ces parlementaires, dans nos démocraties, ils sont finalement assez peu de pouvoir. Hein. C'est un lieu commun de considérer que le Parlement est de moins en moins un lieu de pouvoir. C'est plutôt au gouvernement que ça se joue, et je demandais à Deepa si elle avait pu rencontrer des ministres. Et dans la foulée de cette précision, de cette question, je m'interrogeais aussi sur l'attitude du gouvernement australien, puisqu'on rappelle, Julian Assange est australien. J'ai eu le sentiment que ce gouvernement s'était très peu mobilisé autour de son ressortissant, mais que ça avait quand même changé ces derniers mois.
Well, in Australia, now 85% of people oppose the extradition of Assange. Because as time passes, we get more successful, because the lies are more and more clear. But of course, all this time, Julian is in prison. But at least the fight is easier, slightly easier. Your question about which governments support Julian? At the recent UN General Assembly, Lula made a fantastic speech supporting Julian. But I always remember this, you can find it on YouTube, this conversation with the BBC had with the president of Azerbaijan. And they were asking him what he thinks about press freedom in his country. And he said, maybe we can find it later while we're looking, but he asked them what they think about the case of Julian Assange and what they think about holding people who are critical of the British state and the American state's crimes, illegal wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, in a prison like this. So if we do not want other dictators to come and tell us, because we are always very good in these imperialist countries of telling little countries how to be democratic. But if we don't want to be given lectures by somebody from Azerbaijan or wherever else, then we better try to behave like a democracy.
Thank you.
My question is related to what you've just talked about. Keir Starmer, they have to have a general election before January 2025 in the UK. Does he give you any hope?
Thank you for your exposé. What I think is interesting in your approach is that you started with something about Guantanamo, which is absolutely unusual in this case for me. And for me, why is there no massive and large political support for Julian Assange? It has to do with the war on terror. With the fact that, for instance, even if they say now that there are 85% of the Australians are against his extradition, Australia and the European countries all were involved in the war on terror, be it in Afghanistan or in Iraq. They delivered, several European countries delivered people to Guantanamo, transferred them to there, so they helped to construct Guantanamo, and they send their special services to interrogate people in Guantanamo and so on. So the political problem is there, I think. And of course, I am happy as well that there is political support on the political party level. But the question is, how do they mobilize their basis, the membership of those parties to move and to create a kind of, I won't say mass movement, but a real movement on the ground for Julian Assange? Because talking is easy. I mean, it's not to despise solidarity or things like that. But so for me, the problem is there on this war on terror question. And then is the question also, how can we create links to people who were most, comment on dit, qui était le plus victime, the most victimized by this? How can we create links to them to create a larger movement? Because all those countries we are asking to support Assange, they all extradited people to the United States, UK, Belgium, France, and so on. They all did it. So I'm very suspicious about their support on this question. And so we have to rip off the masks as well, I think, on that question. And what is remarkable is that the support from the South is absolutely much stronger, and all the surrounding of the Western world is more in support of Julian Assange, because they are not implicated in this war on terror, and they are also victims of what the US is doing to them and the Western world in general. So that's a bit my question, and if you can clear this a bit more out.
Alors pour l'enregistrement, plusieurs questions, quelques précisions sur les soutiens dont peut bénéficier Julian Assange au Royaume-Uni, et puis une réflexion effectivement assez importante qui peut expliquer la relative atonie ou la prudence exagérée avec lesquelles les chancelleries occidentales s'engagent sur cette question. C'est, à l'origine, il y a une guerre contre le terrorisme, Et tous les pays occidentaux ont participé à cette guerre, et donc il devient, et à cette occasion, ont extradé des personnes vers les États-Unis. Donc évidemment, il devient très compliqué maintenant de retourner un petit peu sa casquette avec comme indice de ce problème un soutien beaucoup plus affiché des pays du Sud qui n'ont pas été directement impliqués dans la guerre contre le terrorisme, et peut-être la stratégie pour nouer des liens avec les victimes de cette guerre contre le terrorisme. Je répète les questions pour qu'elles puissent être dûment enregistrées. Mais monsieur, vous avez encore une question ou on prend déjà? OK. Thank you, Deepa.
Thank you. As you probably know, there is a case going on in the UK, which is uncovering the role of Keir Starmer's CPS in violating British law to prevent Julian being able to leave the embassy. So, you know, on a personal level, I have explicitly previously said separately about my horror at the fact that somebody like Keir Starmer is leading the party of the supposed working class. Because Keir Starmer is not a socialist, he doesn't care about people. He is trying to be more Tory than the Tories. So he is anti-immigration, he is interested in allowing the soldiers who committed war crimes not to be held accountable. He wants to privatize. He wants to not have the NHS in its current form. So there is nothing that is that different between the Tories and Labour, except Labour are better at using the language to say that, oh yes, we care about the people. So, and even that, you know, Keir Starmer, somebody once, there is a poem online by a very, very nice English comedian called Alexei Sayle. And this poem was read out at the commemoration of Jeremy Corbyn's, I think it was 40 years as an MP. And it's called I Hate Keir Starmer. And if you watch that poem, you will know all the things that, not that you should hate anybody, but watch that. It is really funny, and it's worth watching. The next one is, you said you liked the fact that I was comparing what was, or rather I started with Guantanamo. And the reason I compare Guantanamo with Julian is because at Guantanamo we called them enemy combatants. And that meant international law did not apply. In the case of WikiLeaks, the US calls them non-state hostile intelligence agency. Again, this is to avoid congressional oversight of how much money they spend to surveil Julian in the embassy. So, and then you look at the lawfare against the men at Guantanamo when they change the hearing date. They spy on the lawyers. There are a lot of parallels between the treatment, for example, of Abdel Rahim al-Nashiri, who was tortured and waterboarded and whatever else. And, you know, some people think, oh, Julian he only had psychological torture. But all torture is psychological torture aimed at breaking your spirit. And Julian has been tortured. And there is a real parallel between how they treated al-Nashiri in the illegal process, and how they are treating Julian. And lastly, you know, they are using the same dehumanization, but also the use of smears and the media who don't care, who don't ask questions, to get away with it. And that's our job, to push, to ask.
Thank you, Deepa. A few last questions, maybe?
Bonjour, j'ai une question par rapport à ce qui s'est passé dernièrement en Belgique avec Olivier Van de Castel. On a vu la puissance que les médias et la politique en général pouvaient apporter et faire adhérer la population, ce qui n'est pas le cas avec Julian Assange. C'est la première question. Et deuxièmement, est-ce qu'il n'y aurait pas une possibilité de faire juger Julian Assange, si ça devait se faire, à La Haye, qui est quand même une cour internationale, et ce serait plus neutre éventuellement.
I just wanted to make a comparison with a Belgian case about Mr. De Castel. And in this case, we could see that the media had a lot of power to alert the population. And my second question would be, is there any possibility to try to reach an international court for Julian Assange?
Alors, une question qui compare l'affaire Assange à l'affaire d'un ressortissant belge qui a été détenu en Iran pendant plus d'1 an, je pense, et qui a été libéré à la suite d'un long combat diplomatique. Alors, Deepa vient de me dire qu'elle ne connaissait pas cette affaire, et je pense que la comparaison, effectivement, bon, indépendamment même de la nationalité d'Olivier Van de Castel et de Julian Assange, on constate que l'Australie se mobilise aussi envers son ressortissant, mais évidemment, et ça je pense que je vais rebondir un peu sur le commentaire de monsieur, c'est que ça ne coûte rien à la Belgique de s'opposer au gouvernement iranien et au régime iranien pour le moment. Ça coûterait beaucoup à la Belgique de s'opposer frontalement au gouvernement britannique et a fortiori au gouvernement américain sur cette question. Donc évidemment, les conséquences diplomatiques d'une mobilisation politique contre ou en faveur d'un ressortissant belge détenu en Iran, ressortissant qui par ailleurs était aussi accusé d'espionnage, mais je dirais que c'était, semble-t-il, voilà, qu'il y avait une volonté de la part du gouvernement iranien de détenir des Occidentaux pour ensuite les monnayer contre la libération d'opposants, enfin de personnes iraniennes détenues ici en Belgique, plutôt précisément favorables au régime. Je ne suis pas du tout sûr que cette hypothèse soit possible dans le cas de Julian Assange, et je ne vois pas très bien quelle monnaie d'échange pourrait être mise sur la table dans le cas Assange. Il n'y a pas de monnaie d'échange. You understand what I'm saying? OK. Alors, par rapport à vos questions, je me permets de répondre à la question sur la compétence des juridictions internationales, parce que ça fait partie de mes domaines de recherche. Alors, à La Haye, vous avez plusieurs juridictions internationales, mais vous avez d'une part la Cour internationale de justice qui, elle, ne tranche que les litiges interétatiques. Et donc, on pourrait éventuellement imaginer, mais à ma connaissance, ce n'est pas du tout sur la table et ce serait vraiment je dirais à l'issue de l'affaire, on pourrait imaginer un recours de l'Australie contre le Royaume-Uni et les États-Unis pour ne pas avoir respecté certains principes internationaux qui devraient présider à toute procédure d'extradition. Bon, ça suppose au premier chef et au préalable que les États-Unis et le Royaume-Uni acceptent la compétence de la Cour internationale de justice, parce que c'est une juridiction qui ne repose que sur la volonté des États, au cas par cas. Et donc, on pourrait très bien dire, j'ai pas envie d'être partie à cette instance. Donc ça, c'est pour les recours interétatiques. C'est possible. Ça paraît peu probable, mais c'est possible. Après, à la Haye, vous avez la Cour pénale internationale, mais qui me semble ici pas du tout compétente, ne serait-ce que parce que les États-Unis ne reconnaissent pas son existence. Donc, imaginez des recours contre des membres du gouvernement américain. Déjà, on n'est pas dans une hypothèse de conflit armé, donc il y a toute une partie des compétences de la Cour pénale internationale qui ne sont pas d'actualité. Il faudrait aussi démontrer qu'on est face à un crime contre l'humanité, ce qui est plaidable, mais en toute hypothèse, les États-Unis ne reconnaissent pas l'existence de cette juridiction pénale internationale, qui, elle, ne traite que des individus. Et donc, c'est aussi une voie... voilà, il n'y a pas d'issue. Le recours, et c'est le recours qui est actuellement en préparation par l'équipe de défense de Julian Assange, c'est un recours, je ne vais pas être trop technique, c'est un recours à la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme. Et en particulier dans la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, vous avez un article, l'article 39, ok, qui permet de saisir la Cour pour obtenir des mesures provisoires. Alors, ça ne marche pas toujours, et la Belgique est un mauvais exemple. On nous avait demandé de ne pas extrader Nizar Trabelsi aux États-Unis, et les avocats de Nizar Trabelsi, qui sont en partie les mêmes que ceux de Julian Assange, en tout cas au niveau du barreau bruxellois, avaient sollicité la Cour européenne, qui avait dit à la Belgique « arrêtez l'extradition ». La Belgique s'est assise sur cette décision et a extradé, comme vous le savez, Nizar Trabelsi aux États-Unis, qui, de façon quand même relativement surprenante, a été acquitté après 10 ans de détention préventive dans des situations absolument horribles. Et pour le moment, on ne sait pas très bien ce que va devenir Nizar Trabelsi, puisque la Belgique ne semble pas vraiment vouloir le récupérer. Et donc, la situation est complètement ubuesque, puisqu'il est acquitté, mais toujours détenu. Bon. Alors, je mentionne cet exemple-là pour ne pas créer de faux espoirs, c'est-à-dire que dans l'hypothèse la plus favorable où la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme demanderait au Royaume-Uni de stopper immédiatement l'extradition vers les États-Unis, il est possible que le gouvernement britannique, qui n'a pas manqué de marquer son hostilité envers la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme ces derniers mois à propos d'autres affaires, il n'est pas impossible que le gouvernement britannique dise « c'est très bien, mais je n'en fais rien ». Mais donc ça, c'est la piste la plus crédible actuellement. C'est l'article 39 de la Convention qui permet d'obtenir une mesure provisoire, en principe, si les États sont de bonne foi, qui permet de stopper la procédure d'extradition, pendant que la Cour européenne, à ce moment-là, se saisirait du fond de l'affaire. Et c'est là que le travail de Deepa, évidemment, est précieux, parce qu'on pourrait démontrer à Strasbourg le fait que la procédure judiciaire d'extradition n'a pas été respectueuse de toute une série de garanties consacrées par la Convention européenne. Et donc on pourrait demander à Strasbourg de se prononcer sur le fond et alors à ce moment-là d'empêcher définitivement toute extradition vers les États-Unis. Mais le problème, c'est qu'on craint que le gouvernement anglais ne soit pas très intimidé par une mesure provisoire émanant de Strasbourg. Et une fois que Julian Assange est aux États-Unis, c'est fini. Les États-Unis ne sont évidemment pas partis à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. La Cour européenne des droits de l'homme n'a aucune compétence à l'égard des États-Unis, aucune autorité à l'égard des États-Unis. Sachez également que les États-Unis ne sont pas partis de l'équivalent américain de notre Convention européenne, la Convention interaméricaine des droits de l'homme, où il y a également une juridiction interaméricaine, mais les États-Unis ne sont pas partis à cette convention, donc ne sont pas tenus de répondre à cette juridiction. Donc voilà. C'est pour le moment, c'est la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme. Et pour connaître un petit peu la jurisprudence de cette Cour, l'affaire Assange va être décisive pour cette Cour et pour sa crédibilité. Si la Cour donne raison à Julian Assange, non seulement elle consacrera toute une série de garanties, en particulier des garanties liées à la liberté de la presse, des garanties liées aux procédures d'extradition, des garanties liées au droit à un procès équitable, non seulement elle pourra définitivement, rien n'est jamais définitif en droit, mais en tout cas clairement confirmer une jurisprudence qui est pour le moment favorable à Julian Assange. Elle pourrait même aller un petit peu plus loin, notamment sur les enjeux d'extradition, où la Cour est parfois un petit peu timide. Mais si la Cour donne tort à Julian Assange, alors là, c'est 30 ans de jurisprudence progressiste qui s'écroulerait d'un coup. À la fois en matière de liberté de presse, à la fois en matière de droit à un procès équitable, à la fois en matière d'interdiction de torture et de traitement inhumain et dégradant, à la fois en matière de droit à la vie privée familiale, et à la fois, évidemment, en matière de liberté d'expression et d'association. Et ça, c'est l'enjeu clé de l'affaire de Julian Assange. Si la Cour revient en arrière, alors là, c'est la porte ouverte pour tous les États qui se seront extrêmement satisfaits de ce recul jurisprudentiel. Et vraiment, pour les, entre guillemets, les observateurs de la jurisprudence de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, c'est vraiment l'enjeu majeur que pose l'affaire Assange si elle est, à un moment donné, sur les bancs des juges de la Cour européenne.
Thank you very much. I have, it's a couple of very short questions. Deepa, you mentioned that, of course, we knew during the hearings that there were a lot, that the rooms were full, and you mentioned that there were 92 seats, and that that there were only 2 seats for the public. And I thought about it, and I don't even know who were the other people, who was the most of the people, who were there. Was it the embassy, the US embassy staff? Was it, of course, the defense, the accusation, but who else than observers was allowed in the rooms? And questions for...
Quelles étaient les autres personnes présentes lors de ces audiences, soit des observateurs ou des observatrices comme vous, soit des personnes de l'ambassade des États-Unis, des personnes de services de renseignement. Donc c'est intéressant d'avoir évidemment le type de public qui assistait à ces audiences. Merci monsieur. Et...
And a question for you, because you're a professor, and I'm very keen to know what is, because they know your involvement and your in the cause and your students. I mean, and how do they react? Because you must. Do you speak about it? Is it possible to evoke to talk about it within your teachings, or what do you feel about the reception of the case within the youth and within the group of your students? This would be my, and then my maybe one reflection, because we talk about politicians, journalists, parliamentarians. My feeling, and this is more an observation, my own observation, is that parliamentarians, they always feel that they have to be on the right side of the story. In a way, it's important for them because they feel there is something behind the story of Julian. There is something hidden. There is something they don't quite know why or what sometimes, but it will be important for them one day to be able to say that they asked a question to the minister, went to this commission and did something, or replied to an email of Marie-France, that they were at some stage somewhere, so they did a little bit more than nothing. But to go the step beyond and the step further, make a coalition to actually go through the groups, and that's what we saw in Belgium within our actions, to have even a text signed by 2 or 3 parties together, is something somehow impossible to do, or very hard to get to, because they won't agree on the wording, they won't agree on some details, and they lose the main issue, which is Julian. And my point is now to just say that we should move in the way that we look at MPs or journalists. Our cause should be to move this cause from. You mentioned that it is a basic cause. Someone said it's a basic, maybe Marie-France. It's a very basic case, but in fact it's more of an essential case, and the essentiality of the case should be stressed within the groups of journalists, politicians, and so that those who actually persecute Julian since years can actually feel that it's more expensive for them to continue persecuting him than actually letting it go. And this is the stage that we all need to come to, in different groups of society. I hope I was clear.
Thank you. Alors, je vais rapidement répondre à la question qui m'était adressée sur ce que je peux constater dans les auditoires, et puis je laisserai Deepa répondre à vos autres questions et peut-être proposer déjà une première conclusion avant un petit mot de Marie-France. Alors, l'essentiel de mes cours se donne en première année, et donc il faut vous imaginer que cette année-ci, par exemple, c'est des personnes qui sont nées en 2004-2005. Donc, ils sont nés après le 11 septembre. Ils avaient à peine 5 ans, 6 ans quand Wikileaks a commencé à diffuser des images particulièrement insupportables. Et donc, tout ça, ils ne voient pas très bien Guantanamo, ils ne voient pas du tout ce dont il est question. Et donc, c'est quand même un sentiment relatif d'étrangeté qu'il manifeste à l'égard de cette affaire. Alors, j'en parle pas beaucoup, d'abord parce que je donne des cours d'introduction au droit, et donc j'espère d'abord qu'ils comprennent ce qu'est la COCOF avant d'entamer avec eux d'autres débats plus voilà, j'ai un cahier des charges en quelque sorte, et voilà, ma responsabilité d'enseigner le droit public belge, et pas tellement de faire état de ma vie militante ou d'enjeux qui dépassent le cadre de mon cours. Mais en effet, je constate que quand j'évoque des événements géopolitiques, il y a quand même un cours, pour rebondir sur la question de monsieur, sur la lutte contre le terrorisme, l'instrumentalisation du droit dans cette lutte. Mais en fait, je dois vraiment leur expliquer beaucoup de choses, et beaucoup de choses factuelles. Le 11 septembre, ils ne voient pas du tout ce que c'est. L'invasion de l'Afghanistan, ça leur dit vaguement quelque chose, mais l'Iran, l'Irak, tout ça, c'est pas du tout quelque chose qu'ils ont en tête. Donc, il n'y a pas un écho immédiat. Alors, à ceci près que je donne aussi un cours en master avec des étudiants et des étudiantes un peu plus âgés, et le cours s'intitule « Droits et mouvements sociaux ». Alors là, évidemment, le cours permet complètement que j'évoque notamment l'usage du droit, que je puisse évoquer les missions d'observation juridique, mais en ayant malgré tout un regard quand même relativement sceptique sur l'efficacité du droit, puisque là, et c'est bien sûr, vous allez dire que mon regard est biaisé, et vous aurez raison, mais en l'espèce, le droit est du côté de Julian Assange, et pour autant, ça ne change pas grand-chose. Donc, c'est un bon exemple auquel je fais en effet référence pour montrer, c'est un cours qui s'adresse à des juristes qui ont tendance un petit peu à idéaliser le discours juridique, à idéaliser la force du droit. Et, si le droit dit que c'est comme ça, alors c'est vrai. Je dis non, en fait, c'est pas. Et c'est un bon exemple pour un petit peu tempérer l'enthousiasme que peuvent nourrir des étudiants, des étudiantes qui s'adonnent à la militance et qui pensent que le droit peut être un instrument précieux. Il l'est, évidemment, et j'ai encore confiance dans la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, mais il montre évidemment ses limites en raison du contexte géopolitique, des enjeux plus idéologiques qui sont derrière chaque affaire. Et ici, évidemment, ces enjeux sont manifestes et gigantesques, comme l'a rappelé Deepa. Voilà.
I'm just digesting that. Thank you. Maybe I was not very clear in explaining, but there are 92 seats across the two public galleries, two courts, and so in what we call the well of the court, right at the bottom, the journalists sit behind the lawyers. In front of them, the judge with the symbol of the realm behind her. We are sitting in the balcony upstairs, the two public galleries. The galleries are empty, except for two people in the morning, and then by the afternoon they allow a total of 5. In the other gallery, the 5 people are Julian's family. So 5 and 5. That's it. Even with COVID 2-meter measures, you have enough space for more.
Il y avait des représentants officiels, vous avez vu des personnes de l'ambassade, des personnes... Enfin, voilà.
I'm glad you said that. So actually, you know, the reason we had only 2 seats in the second public gallery was because we found out that 3 seats were reserved for VIPs in the public gallery. And those 3 seats were for the Australian embassy. But not even on one day was anybody in those seats. In the well of the court, though, Heike Hensel and also, you know, from the Partei, Martin Sonneborn, he had sent a representative. Heike Hensel was there. Zavim Dagdalen was there one day. There are a few other people who had come. But what I thought was very funny about the journalists was one of them was sitting there and he was reading the newspaper while the testimony was going on. So I don't know how many, there were good journalists. And, you know, we have Craig Murray, who wrote an excellent account of what was going on, and some good journalists here and there, but on a regular basis, I did not see, other than one particular journalist whom I saw regularly, maybe not one, maybe a few more actually, but no major news organization was covering it every day, is all I can say.
Okay. Voilà, je vous propose, Marie-France, de tirer certaines conclusions, d'inviter peut-être le public à d'autres activités que vous organisez ces prochains jours. En tout cas, je vous remercie encore pour l'organisation de cette journée et je salue et je remercie nos traducteurs et traductrices qui ont fait un travail dans des conditions pas évidentes, mais formidables. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Moi, je voudrais, oui, pas seulement me limiter à annoncer les activités prochaines. Je voudrais un peu tirer des conclusions, pas seulement de ce que l'on vient d'entendre sur le procès de Julian Assange, mais aussi sur notre mobilisation. Et je voudrais revenir, par exemple, sur le cas qu'on a évoqué tout à l'heure de Olivier Van de Castel. Beaucoup de membres de notre comité allaient aussi aux mobilisations pour faire libérer Olivier Van de Castel. Mais on ne voulait pas mêler, je vais dire, les deux choses. Par contre, quand il a été libéré, nous avons écrit des lettres à des députés et à la ville de Bruxelles aussi, pour dire, voilà, maintenant Olivier Van de Castel est libre et nous en sommes très heureux, mais pourquoi est-ce que vous ne faites rien pour Julian Assange? Et par exemple, on a écrit à la ville de Bruxelles pour demander que l'on mette des panneaux pour Julian Assange, comme ils avaient mis des panneaux pour Olivier Van de Castel, en disant, bien sûr, Julian Assange n'est pas belge, et on comprend qu'il y a eu plus d'implications pour Olivier Van de Castel, mais vous avez aussi un panneau sur la place royale pour Masha Amini. La ville de Bruxelles se tient aux côtés des femmes iraniennes. Pourquoi la ville de Bruxelles ne pourrait-elle pas se tenir aux côtés de ceux qui représentent la liberté de la presse et le droit à l'information? Et on nous a dit, il faut vous adresser au ministère des Affaires étrangères. Et le ministère des Affaires étrangères n'a jamais répondu. Donc voilà, ça c'est aussi des actions que nous essayons de faire. Mais ça montre bien qu'il y a quelque chose de politique, effectivement. Dans la lettre que nous avions écrite, nous disions, nous savons que Olivier Van de Castel était en Iran. Est-ce que le fait que Julian Assange soit menacé par les États-Unis explique le manque de, ou soit pour une raison quelconque, dans le manque de réactivité? Et bien sûr, c'est quelque chose que je note aussi. Voilà, on a parlé tout à l'heure des pays de l'Amérique latine. On a cité Lula, mais il y a plus de, je crois que c'est 9 présidents, ce n'est même pas des ministres, ce sont des présidents qui ont pris fait et cause pour Julian Assange et qui parlent de lui le plus souvent possible et qui n'attendent pas qu'on leur pose la question, qui y vont, qui informent. Et là aussi, on voit que ce ne sont pas des pays qui sont, je vais dire, dans la même sphère politique. Nous sommes dans un monde qui politiquement est instable et on sait qu'il y a des puissances impérialistes et qu'il y a d'autres peuples et d'autres pays qui en souffrent. Et assurément, le cas de Julian Assange est un cas politique. Et c'est pour ça aussi que c'est tellement difficile d'agir dans ce cas. Pour nous, je pense pour nous, vraiment, le comité, il y a plusieurs opinions politiques. Tout le monde n'a pas les mêmes opinions politiques. Mais ce que nous voulons défendre, d'abord et avant tout, c'est le fait que nous, le peuple, la population veut être informée de ce qui se passe. On ne peut pas nous cacher des choses et agir en notre nom en disant que bah non, on a fait ça parce que c'était la seule chose à faire. On veut être informé. Et donc, c'est pour ça, je pense que la majorité d'entre nous, nous nous battons pour que Julian Assange soit libéré, parce que c'est un humain et qu'un être humain, nous ne voulons pas non plus le voir souffrir comme ça, mais ça, il y en a d'autres, hein, des prisonniers. Donc, nous nous battons pour eux aussi, mais bon, pour Julian Assange, parce que nous voulons qu'il sorte de cette maltraitance, je dirais qu'il retrouve une vie normale, si c'est possible. Mais nous nous battons aussi pour notre droit à l'information, pour notre droit à savoir prendre nos décisions, parce que nous sommes des citoyens et que dans une démocratie, normalement, ce sont les citoyens qui doivent pouvoir prendre leurs décisions. Et je pense que c'est pour ça que nous restons mobilisés. Alors peut-être qu'on peut se dire aujourd'hui, en voyant que la salle est plutôt clairsemée, que nous ne sommes pas si mobilisés que ça. Mais en réalité, tous les lundis, nous sommes sur une place publique, à Namur et à Bruxelles, et on va au-devant des gens qui ne sont pas invités à des conférences, des gens que l'on rencontre par hasard. Et peut-être des gens, si on les invitait à une conférence à l'ULB, peut-être ils ne viendraient pas, parce que l'ULB, c'est peut-être quelque chose, l'université, qui est loin d'eux. Donc nous allons au-devant de ces gens-là, nous discutons avec eux. Et chez ces gens-là, on obtient une écoute, une véritable écoute à propos de Julian Assange. Et vous avez parlé de vos élèves. Bien sûr, nous rencontrons aussi des jeunes, des très jeunes, qui n'ont pas connu non plus, qui sont nés après le 11 septembre. Mais il y a parfois une écoute, et là je vais dire quelque chose, j'espère que vous comprendrez ce que je veux dire. Il y a des jeunes qui sont d'une origine autre que belgo-belge, et eux, ils ont plus d'écoute. Et je fais référence, j'ose dire ça parce que Julian Assange a dit que quand il avait publié la vidéo Collateral Murder, il a dit Collateral Murder, les Afghans n'ont pas besoin de le voir, les Irakiens n'ont pas besoin de le voir, ils ont Collateral Murder tous les jours. Mais il faut que Collateral Murder soit vu partout dans le monde pour que les gens qui ne subissent pas ça et qui sont, sans même parfois le vouloir, sans même le savoir, sont partie prenante de cette menace et de ces guerres et de ces attaques contre d'autres pays. Il faut que ces gens le voient et qu'ils voient ce qui se passe. Et Julian Assange est donc aussi non seulement quelqu'un qui représente l'information et le droit à la liberté, mais aussi quelqu'un qui représente la paix et la volonté d'aller vers la paix. Alors nous, voilà, on fait notre travail. Oui, j'appelle ça un travail parce que je pense qu'on le fait avec conviction et sérieux. On va au-devant des gens, on leur parle, on essaye de leur faire comprendre. Il y a des gens qui comprennent, il y a des gens qui sont... On a vu des gens pleurer quand on leur expliquait ce qui se passait. Ils vont signer la pétition et on peut se dire oui, ils rentrent chez eux et puis ils ont signé une pétition. Moi, je ne pense pas. Je pense que quand même, dans la tête de ces personnes, maintenant, Julian Assange, quand on l'entend à la TV, quand on l'entend à la radio, quand on l'entend, parce qu'on ne l'entend pas assez souvent, ils se disent « Ah oui, c'est cette personne dont on nous a parlé sur la place ». Et peut-être que nous, on est, je ne sais pas combien de pourcents de véritablement convaincus, militants, à travailler pour la libération de Julian Assange. Je ne sais pas combien de pourcents de Belges ça représente, très peu sans doute. Mais avec notre travail, nous élargissons un pourcentage de gens qui sont sensibilisés à cette cause. Et c'est pour ça que je pense que notre travail, malgré son peu d'ampleur, est quand même un travail important. Et donc, on va le continuer. Et donc, on se retrouvera lundi sur la place de l'Ange ou sur la place de... Enfin, ce lundi-ci, non. Nous serons devant l'ambassade du Royaume-Uni parce que tous les premiers lundis du mois, c'est devant l'ambassade du Royaume-Uni et les autres lundis sur la place de la Monnaie. À Namur, c'est sur la place de l'Ange. Et j'appelle toujours tout le monde à essayer d'en faire dans d'autres villes, si c'est possible, à Anvers peut-être. Voilà, je vise quelqu'un là, c'est pas bien parce que voilà, Magda, elle vient à Bruxelles, elle se déplace d'Anvers à Bruxelles pour venir le lundi nous soutenir. Donc c'est quelqu'un de vraiment très, très engagé. Donc nous allons continuer ce travail-là. Nous allons continuer à écrire aux parlementaires, aux journaux, pour essayer de faire éclater un peu la bulle dans laquelle nous sommes enfermés et pour que de plus en plus de monde sache ce qui se passe. Et alors, continuer aussi à faire des projections et des conférences. Et la prochaine projection, je vais l'annoncer puisque nous en avons une qui est prévue le 12 octobre, le jeudi 12 octobre. C'est dans le cadre du Festival Cinéma d'Attaque et ce sera une projection d'Ithaca au Cinéma Aventure ici à Bruxelles. Alors, je voulais vous remercier vraiment du fond du cœur d'avoir accepté de faire cet entretien aujourd'hui. Et bien sûr aussi remercier là aussi vraiment les interprètes. Je n'ose même pas les regarder pour leur travail qu'ils ont fait. Et tous ceux qui sont venus, en demandant à tous ceux qui sont venus, eh bien, faites savoir ce qui s'est passé, répétez ce que Deepa a dit, parlez-en et essayez que la prochaine fois, eh bien, on soit plus nombreux. Voilà. Merci.